Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, a place of liberty, and the cradle of American democracy. But beneath this veneer of history and justice lies a darker, more complex story. A story told not in textbooks, but in courtrooms, in prisons, and in the lives of those caught in the web of its legal system. Today, we're diving deep into some of the most controversial sentences ever handed down in Philadelphia's history. These aren't just legal cases. They are stories that rock the city, question the very definition of justice, and continue to spark debate to this day. Our journey begins with one of the most famous names ever to be associated with a Philly prison cell, Al Capone. In 1929, the notorious Chicago gangster was arrested in Philadelphia for carrying a concealed, unlicensed handgun. What happened next was shocking. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to a year in prison, all within 16 hours of his arrest. For a man who had evaded serious charges for so long, this was a swift and stunning blow. His sentence was served at the Eastern State Penitentiary, and his cell, surprisingly lavish for the time, became the stuff of legend. But was this justice, or a convenient way for law enforcement to take a high-profile criminal off the streets, even if only for a short time? The speed and severity of the sentence for a relatively minor charge raised eyebrows and set a precedent for how Philly would handle its most notorious figures. Fast forward a few decades to a case that ignited a firestorm of activism and international attention, the story of Mumia Abu-Jamal. In 1981, Abu-Jamal, a journalist and Black Panther Party activist, was involved in a late-night traffic stop that ended in tragedy. Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner was shot and killed, and Abu-Jamal was found at the scene with a gunshot wound. The trial that followed was one of the most contentious in the city's history. Abu-Jamal was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. From the very beginning, the case was plagued by allegations of racial bias, coerced witnesses, and judicial misconduct. Supporters, including figures like Nelson Mandela and Amnesty International, called him a political prisoner, a victim of a racist system. They pointed to inconsistencies in the evidence and the prosecution's alleged suppression of key facts. On the other side, the Faulkner family and police unions saw Abu-Jamal as a cold-blooded killer and the sentence as rightful justice for a fallen officer. For decades, the legal battle raged. His death sentence was eventually overturned in 2011 and commuted to life in prison without parole, but the controversy is far from over. Was he a radical voice silenced by the system, or a murderer who got the sentence he deserved? The case of Mumia Abu-Jamal forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about race, politics, and justice in Philadelphia. Now, let us shift our focus to a case that exposed the dark underbelly of power and corruption within the city's own institutions. The Kids for Cash scandal, while centered in nearby Luzerne County, had deep reverberations in Philadelphia's legal community and highlighted systemic issues. In the early 2000s, two judges, Mark Ciavarella Jr.B. and Michael Conahan, were found to have accepted millions of dollars in kickbacks from the developers of private juvenile detention centers. In return, they sentenced thousands of children to detention, often for minor offenses like petty theft or schoolyard scuffles. These weren't just harsh sentences. They were sentences for sale. Young lives were ruined, families were torn apart, all for profit. When the scandal broke, it sent shockwaves across the nation. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned thousands of juvenile convictions, calling the judge's actions a stunning and shocking betrayal of public trust. Ciavarella was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, and Conahan to over 17 years. This case wasn't just about two corrupt judges. It was a horrifying indictment of a system where children could become commodities. It forced Philadelphia and the entire state to re-examine its juvenile justice system and the very ethics of privatized prisons. Another story that gripped the city and raised profound ethical questions was that of Dr. Kermit Gosnell. In 2013, the Philadelphia abortion provider was convicted of murder in the deaths of 3 infants born alive during attempted abortions. He was also found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of a patient. The details that emerged from his trial were stomach-churning. His clinic was described as a house of horrors, with unsanitary conditions, unqualified staff, and a complete disregard for patient safety and the law. Prosecutors argued that Gosnell regularly performed illegal, late-term abortions and killed babies who survived the procedure. The defense claimed he was being unfairly targeted and was providing a service to a desperate community. The jury sided with the prosecution, and Gosnell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case was deeply polarizing. For opponents of abortion, it was a confirmation of their worst fears about the industry. For supporters of abortion rights, it was the horrific result of what happens when safe, legal access to healthcare is restricted, forcing women into the hands of dangerous practitioners. The Gosnell case forced a painful, city-wide conversation about regulation, women's health, and the moral complexities surrounding abortion, leaving a scar on the city's conscience. Finally, we turn to a more recent case that has put a spotlight on the city's current struggle with criminal justice reform, the story of Meek Mill. In 2008, the Philadelphia-born rapper was convicted on gun and drug charges and sentenced to probation. For the next decade, he was trapped in a cycle of parole violations, often for minor infractions like popping a wheelie on a dirt bike or getting into a scuffle at an airport. In 2017, a judge sentenced him to 2 to 4 years in state prison for these violations, a sentence that was widely seen as outrageously harsh and unjust. The decision sparked the #FreeMeekMill movement, drawing support from celebrities, athletes, and politicians. They argued that his case was a prime example of a broken probation and parole system that disproportionately targets people of color and traps them in a cycle of incarceration for nonviolent offenses. After a massive public outcry and a long legal battle, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ordered his release in 2018, and his original conviction was eventually overturned. Meek Mill has since become a leading voice for criminal justice reform, co-founding the Reform Alliance to change the very laws that kept him entangled with the system for so long. His sentence, and the fight to overturn it, became a symbol of a new generation's fight for a more equitable justice system in Philadelphia. From a Prohibition-era gangster to a modern-day hip-hop star, from a radical journalist to a corrupt judge, these cases reveal the deep and often troubling complexities of justice in Philadelphia. They show us that a sentence is never just a number. It's a reflection of the society that imposes it, with all its biases, fears, and struggles. These stories challenge us to ask difficult questions and to demand a system that is truly just for all. What do you think is the most controversial case in your city's history? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this journey into Philadelphia's legal past interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most compelling stories.